Okay, welcome back to Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 84. This is part 3 this week in geopolitics. And there have been lots of updates on the different conflicts that are happening around the world. I always analyze in the context of following the money, the macro side, and help people understand what I think comes next. And I think you'll agree, if you're a long-term listener, that I tend to go counter-narrative sometime. Most people believe that Israel is in control. They're going to draw US into a war with Iran, and that the genocide is going to complete. The genocide is awful. The humanitarian crisis is awful. I change my voice because when I go into seeing what's happening there, it's different from what I believe is going to come next in terms of the geopolitical analysis side. It's got nothing to do with what I want to happen, because nothing that I want to happen will happen. It's the people that have real power structure that are in the game that are going to decide what happens. And my job is to report to you what the media is not telling you and the bullshit that the politicians are telling you, so you can get ahead of it and understand what I believe is happening next. And if I get it wrong, I'll tell you. But at the moment, I think I'm dead right with what I've been saying. As a little recap, the military-industrial complex, the faction of the Proof of Weapons Network, headed up by BlackRock and its portfolio companies like General Dynamic, Raytheon, Boeing, and various other ones, and even Palantir in the technical side. It is reallocating budgets according to their financial statements. It is shifting them away from a focus on the Middle East, and it is going towards Europe instead, where there's more money to be made, and Asia Pacific region, where there is more money to be made by ratcheting up narratives. So I'll go through the narratives that happened this week that really are completely in line with what I predicted in previous episodes. Because the reason that is happening is because the financial investments and strategic partnerships and now dominate the Middle East that make a lot more money if there is normalization in the region and the ability to use nuclear energy and invest in AI data centers and cryptocurrency exchanges and stable coins and energy utilization. There is a lot more money for the old neocons, which are trying to make all of the money left over from Biden, and then they've got Trump more aligned with the banks. So Trump is investing all his money there, and the banks and financial institutions are doing deals with sovereign countries like Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia. They normalized with Iran because of China's plan of normalization between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That led to, I believe, what happened with the weakening of the axis, the overthrow and regime change within Syria, and the eventual regime change within Israel, so that the GCC and the financial institutions can acquire Israel in distress and turn it eventually into what may be a two-state solution, but eventually a one-state solution. So all of the aggression that is escalating right now is going to only weaken Israel in terms of its strategic acquisitions. It's no longer the primary target for large-scale forever wars. That neocon model is about to end. And it's just about doing deals with the Gulf Cooperation Council, which has the sovereign wealth and has the sovereign access to energy as well. And basically, the weapons deal is selling the BlackRock, weapons from the BlackRock portfolio companies, not based upon strategic tension between Iran and Israel, and narrative control that makes it look like Muslims are trying to kill Jews, and funding groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is still happening, by the way, right now from the West through USAID. Still got some of those operations that are happening right now. With the last bit of money that's left over with those strategic opportunities, but instead they're giving those weapons to police the regions, and artificial intelligence contracts with Palantir to police the regions, with them able to host the data in its own AI data centers with its own energy and nuclear energy. And so Trump was there to usher in all of those deals that takes away the colonial power that America historically has had in the Middle East, and usher in a wave of decolonization as well. And so we're getting more and more withdrawals, which is what I was predicting based upon the current situation. And all of that we're seeing as well, that I think is the vision for that. And also Bitcoin mining, I think that's strategically being involved. And Bitcoin sovereign reserves, I believe, are being built up right now through Bitcoin mining and just not being publicly disclosed as well. So this is essentially a US, through strategic investment, pragmatic shrinking of America into a regional power, getting rid of the covert operations, which was the main purpose of Israel, which was a Middle Eastern instability campaign to serve US corporations and the neocon model of funding wars. Now this is a stability campaign instead. And we're moving away from those open-ended wars that were the previous 100 years under the British Empire and the American Empire. Essentially, the China plan of normalization with Iran and Saudi Arabia, but the weapons are used in order to stabilize rather than destabilize. And this also serves America's target of hitting their... You get the big, beautiful bill. You print a bunch of money printing, which is theft from American people. You hand it over to these corporate contracts, and you get to pretend your GDP is higher based upon fake growth. And you get to fund a stimulation through war that then allows you to sell more bonds and go through everything that we've covered in the macro section in part 2. So what's the actual strategy? It's essentially create new threats, create new opportunities in the final phases, use up the weapons, use up the money, and then you can move over to the regions that you're going to make up for the profits that are not covered in the Middle East. And so you need to push strings like the Putin is Hitler narrative, and Putin's about to take over to Europe. That allows the European Union to get the European Central Bank to print more money. And then that money printing can be strategically moved away from the European people over to the proxy governments that are being installed across the European Union that are setting up or potentially having their Bitcoin strategic reserves, but are manufacturing narratives around far-right invasions and various other things in order to justify why they're going to spend up to 5% on NATO to send those all of that military budget over to America. And so that's escalating tensions within Asia Pacific as well. And so that's so you can make up for the lost money from the military companies. And you can make up for it by selling weapons to Japan, selling weapons to Philippines, selling weapons to Taiwan. And you just need to ratchet up some narrative pretending that China is about to invade Taiwan and take over those chips. Basically, when you think about it, when you're following the money, this is just basically portfolio management. That's how I've always thought it. And people think that that's not why wars happen. They think they're organic. None of them are organic, especially when you read the operation, like through Operation Gladio, the book Operation Gladio. I recommend to everybody by Paul Williams to understand how these different groups and militias were set up. And how they're utilized by intelligence agencies to protect corporate interests, create civil unrest and violence campaign. It's just about propping up fake GDP, having the growth, and protecting corporate interests at the expense of the American people, as I covered in the macro section. This isn't US acting like an empire anymore. It's acting like a corporate sales rep. And that's what I think is happening right now. And the controllers of the empire is the Proof of Weapons Network. And I call BlackRock the current CEO. Power structures change, but they've got the most assets under administration and the best technology that is used by Treasury and also for monetary policy and central bank, both fiscal and monetary policy in case of America. And all of the different asset managers are using their technology, which is why they have the power play at the moment. They have BlackRock has substantial stakes across all of the defense, technology, consumer, and money, as I covered in part 2, just recapping it as well. And they're able to utilize Western governments like the US, the EU, and the UK as proxies. You know how you always say Hezbollah is an Iran-backed proxy? Well, the US is a proof of weapons-backed proxy. Trump is a sales rep for this proxy force of the proof of weapon network. And then they're able to get strategic tension in order to maximize their portfolio. And basically, policy just becomes product placement. It becomes theft. It becomes narrative control. Essentially, just becomes a marketing strategy for war and selling weapons. And national interests are basically secondary. And so, if it serves national interest to rebuild a bridge for the portfolio, then you'll only get it if they can do that. But if there's no loss making, you won't get your bridge. You won't get your infrastructure. For them, it's just about the, countries are just nodes on the proof of weapon network, just like Bitcoin proof of work has nodes that have backup of all transactions to provide security. This is securing the profits of the proof of weapons network based upon creating as many debt-based fiat Ponzi schemes so that countries work for the proof of weapons network. And it's all about maximizing portfolios and profits without any type of humanitarian consideration. That's why I follow the money in determining this. And I know narrative is always the opposite of what it said. So what did we see this week in geopolitics? Let's go through some of the events. Firstly, we had the complete removal of the USS Harry Truman, which returned home after a failed war with Yemen. Remember I said you can only win if you have a ground invasion, and a ground invasion means a full proxy. So just doing these were just blowing up bombs, humanitarian crisis in a war you can't win for the profits of the military industrial complex. Exactly how it played out. Trump made some money by killing, and using bombs, and he made it for his bosses. We also had in Syria, basically Syria, which is vassalized by Turkey and the GCC. American interests are retreating, which is represented by sanctions. You had the sanction removal, which means that the Syrian proxy government for Turkey and GCC can be used to gain access to wheat and oil, which is their industry, which stops the starvation campaigns, which historically had. And you don't get the funding of US and Israeli proxies like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which is a militias that we use to create the civil war. And then you had Hezbollah resistance groups that came in to fight ISIS within Syria during the civil war. And then that was used in order to create narratives of Shia versus Sunni, to create divide and conquer narratives. And because the Assad regime was also, a military dictator that would take out any of these forces. So when ISIS is coming in, you could say he's killing Sunnis. And then you could use that to ratchet up the Shia Sunni divide and conquer. You could confuse people with this mess. And then when you have different militia groups funded by America coming in, you basically have CIA funding it or Mossad funding it. It's all about divide and conquer. And then you have Assad that would put these people in torture camps. And then you have, civil unrest. And then you have rebel groups that want to overthrow the government, all because of these sanctions. And the old tricks that have been used, all of them were used on Syria. Now you're not seeing any of those false flags, from that side. But Israel, which is essentially a pariah state right now, Netanyahu looking after his own career when he was a representative for military prior, I think he's trying to create strategic escalation. So you saw the government that is effectively normalized with Israel already, normalized with the GCC, normalized with Iran, by allowing the rebels to come in and the Turkey and all the forces that have happened right now. There was a claim that Syria is firing rockets at Israel. because Israel's trying to gain more land here in its negotiations so that it can negotiate its exit with the GCC. And it was saying that the Syrian government was firing rockets at Israel. Makes zero sense whatsoever. This would be Israel occupying land and firing rockets at itself in order to gain some more negotiation power, explore opportunities to make a little bit more profit for the military-industrial complex while they eventually exit as well. I believe Syria is on board with the GCC plan. They make him as an interim leader. He used to work with ISIS, so I think it was Saudi Arabia's pick of a temporary leader in order to manage this strategic weakening of Israel so that it can be acquired in distress as we move from a two-state solution under Abraham Accords 2 that eventually will be, through acquisition and strategic weakening, a one-state solution. And if you take out all of the British Empire and American Empire and military-industrial complex violence funding, you can just have Jews, Muslims, and Christians returning to peace how they lived before. They always welcome Jews. Remember, Palestinians, if you go back through the generations, they were originally Jews. Some of them converted to Christians, and then later some of them converted to Islam. But the blood heritage that the military-industrial complex creates this narrative trying to say Jews are trying to, the Muslims are trying to kill Jews and they're trying to provide a safe place for Jews. This is all narratives that's weaponized for profits. And it's all just campaigns to trick you and then use biblical quotes of prophets, confuse the word Israel, the prophet Israel or Yaqub, and confuse it with the land Israel that was deliberately done through the Zionist mission when it constructed deals with the Rothschild family and the British Empire and all the history we know, all the Hezbollah. I put out a tweet with a speech that covered the Hezbollah and lies and various other things. I don't want to go through all the history. I have given you an overview, covered it very much, but it's absolutely a psyop if you don't understand, to make you think that this is something else, and it is. But Syria's already on board with that plan as well. There's no reason why people, when you take out the unnatural side, can't just return to how they were, because Palestinians always welcomed Jewish immigrants. They just didn't welcome rapage, pillaging, stealing, colonization for the British Empire, weaponizing the Jewish faith, and engaging in false flag operations to put more immigrants to be an awful place for the Jewish people to live. They've always lived in violence. And then you have to engage in ethnic cleansing. And then you have to engage in dehumanizing operations, because you have to work for the IDF. It was the worst thing that could ever happen. Put them in the most unsafest environment. And basically you were just tools for the military industrial complex. And the $7 trillion of money printing that was used by creating all those wars that were unnatural and never need to be created. Anyway, the proof of weapons network is scraping for the final profits for the military industrial complex. I personally still believe before the GCC and the financial companies and the deals take over. And in order to start some of those deals, they had aid contracts. And so America and Israel started to swap out some of these aid contracts. And you're starting to see this. I'm just going to turn the lighting down a little bit. Now that it's got a little bit darker rather. So what have we seen this week? Well, we have had approximately 5 days of taking all the Palestinians, congregating them down the south of Gaza, making them queue up for aid after this 3-month starvation campaign, which is the most disgusting Holocaust you have seen in modern history. This is a modern day Holocaust. And this is being funded by the West. They're being used as negotiation chips in this negotiation while the GCC tries to decolonize. The final deals are being done between America and Iran. Once that deal is announced, you'll get different types of profit activities like real aid. And some of the aid that got through was had a expiry date from last year, because Israel stopped it all getting as deliberately weaponizing starvation, famine, lack of water in order to commit this genocide. But we've had 5 days of very, very tiny aid delivery, just like the campaign. Do you remember the Flower massacre? They let one bit of aid in, they would have Palestinians surrounding, and then they would start shooting them down. We've had the same thing. Hundreds of Palestinians massacred and killed. And this is by the US and Israel joint operation. WikiLeaks released the details of this company. It was a Swiss company funded by US and Israel money, just like the new networks that they set up, like USAID, whatever it was called. WikiLeaks revealed all of those different follow the money. What are they doing now? They're taking CIA funded and Mossad funded ISIS, and they're saying these people are basically taking the aid, and they're telling people that Hamas is taking the aid. And then we got an actual admission, because the cabinet within Israel is in disaster right now because they're absolutely losing this. They're in absolute economic turmoil, civil unrest, because everyone knows that Netanyahu doesn't want to return the hostages. The Zionist faction are putting out genocidal rhetoric. They're funding settlers in order to steal land, take land. They've had more IDF soldiers taken as prisoners of war that they'll call civilians hostages in their narrative. And the defense minister of Israel just came out and point blank admitted on TV that they are arming these ISIS groups in order to take the aid. And so they're not even good at this stuff anymore. It's only the cover up of Western media, and you have to be plugged in and following this and following the money, that they've revealed that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are Western proxies, and they're now weaponizing them in order to steal the land as the aid as they pretend to come through, and they engage in massacre campaigns. And so what happened while this was all happening? Well, a ceasefire was agreed this week, at the early part of this week and last week. Israel agreed to it, allegedly. The US agreed to it. Hamas agreed to it. And the interesting part is what was in the ceasefire agreement. It was what Hamas said all along, right from the agreement that they wanted to do on the third day, which is it said that Hamas would put new leadership in. They wouldn't be a part of the proposal. It would be a transition to a technocrat, they wouldn't be a part of it. And that's the problem. Israel needs Hamas to be a part of it, because Israel needs an excuse to continue the war under the old neocon model. Now, everyone else is on board with the new model. US, GCC, Iran, China. I personally believe, from following the money, everybody's ready for that. But we just got Israel that is still working in the old model. Hamas admitted it and said that in this plan, they would relinquish control. It was part of the signed agreement. The governance and management of Gaza would be completely independent. It would be technical. It would be a technical committee of Palestinians. And they didn't want that. So Israel didn't allow this to happen. And instead, we get Witkoff covering up. We had the United Nations voting against ceasefire, despite the fact that everyone had agreed to this. You got nothing in the media mentioning what's happening unless you were following this as well. So I still believe that the regime change within Israel is going to happen. I still believe it's only going to happen once there is a nuclear deal announced. And despite all of the posturing, I think there will be a nuclear deal, even though people are saying that Iran has turned it down and America is saying, you've got to do this and we won't budge. All posturing from my perspective by following the money. We had a couple of other announcements as a result of these massacres, the continuation of settlers expanding in the West Bank. Saudi Arabia foreign minister, basically the Prince Faisal bin Farhan, he was expected to actually visit the West Bank. This is one of the most senior Saudi officials. And this is the first visit since 1967, the 6-Day War. And so this is Saudi, really looking at what they're going to be acquiring once all of these the settlements are handed over from Israel over to the control of the GCC, and genuine peace rather than destabilization campaigns is put through. Now, remember the Saudi investment fund. Some of that funding is Trump money via Kushner affinity partners. That is Saudi funded, and that is why Trump is on board. It's not because he cares about peace. He wants to get his Nobel Peace Prize through Abraham Accords too. It was China that did it, and they had to allow Trump to get into different deals. And that's why the tariff policy happened, which would strategically weaken America into a regional power, realign with the GCC that were aligned with BRICS, and we'd have this multipolar world order, which BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network, using US and Trump as a proxy, has aligned their investment with, and Trump gets to get rich out of it as well. I think they're aligned. I think this is seizing up and negotiating really what eventually will be a one-state solution rather than a two-state solution. And we'll see. Anyway, that's more speculative part. But Israel refused entry because they know that they don't want the GCC in. So Israel refused, went back on the peace plan and the ceasefire, refused entry from the Saudi. So they are still resisting. And that's why I believe we're going to get regime change, because Israel isn't playing ball with what BlackRock wants. And so I think the military are trying to get their last bit of profits. And then it moves over to the financial complex, will probably lead to a destabilization campaign within Israel. We had, as I said, Iran's supreme leader Khamenei. He was calling out America following basically nuclear talks, basically saying hard line, because I think, Iran knows that there is a much more compelling vision based upon normalization. It requires pleasing the different factions. But I think this is going to be good for Iran and its people. Obviously, they have different proof of weapons networks that have been set, because when you have sanctions, you tend to have these criminal networks that are set up. Sanctions makes the government more and more corrupt. You try and create colored revolutions to push narratives that lead to the people struggling, overthrowing the government. So Iran is very divided in terms of how it thinks and its different ideologies. But if you can get it out of sanctions, that's what America has in their card. But at the same time, monetizing all these investments means you have to work with the GCC. Iran is strategically weakened, but at the same time holds a lot of the cards in this negotiation. So as soon as that nuclear deal is announced, it can make Trump have to do a bit of a taco. It gets this enrichment, would be my forecast. So Iran has power and strategic power there. But the Israel and the US part are kind of weaponizing the genocide and the last profits of military in order to negotiate this. And that's why I think it's taking longer than it should. But anyway, I think this is Iran saying what Iran needs to say. I don't take it literally, but it was a signal that nuclear uranium enrichment has to be part of the deal. And personally, I believe that Iran wants that additional posturing to show that to their people that they got that taco, and this will be used for energy. And when America arms the GCC, you can have balance in the region that would make ushering in peace and investment and all the benefits that can come from that in this new, area. And so, Khamenei was coming out and saying, this is basically none of your business. And we had US veto voting the UN Security Council resolution, which was calling for a Gaza ceasefire. And unanimously, everybody around the world is looking for plausible deniability, doesn't want anything to do with this genocide. But America is the last one using its veto power to veto vote against peace, as it has all along, while pretending it's negotiating peace, because it's just a faction of the military-industrial complex. That is entirely expected, but it's still enraging, knowing that all the massacres are happening, the starvation is happening, the famine is happening, the worst Holocaust. This is a Gaza modern day Holocaust. And it won't be resolved by the United Nations. It will only be resolved via deals, negotiations, and the China peace plan that is very advanced and very far along, and decolonization by the US and alignment of financial interests in order to do that. So anyone that still thinks that the UN is where like the Palestinian cause is going to come from, that's not the power structure. That's the symbolic side once the deal is actually done. As I said, I think it only gets resolved once we get the Iran deal, and I believe the Iran deal will come. And if it doesn't come, then you know I've got this one wrong. But I'm pretty sure we're on that path. They'll be pushing back on the US proposal anyway, and the enrichment is the key thing. There may be port negotiations, other strategic routes, depend how it's all happening, with the bit that we'll never be able to do. But Iran will continue to play hardball. Trump will continue to play hardball until we get the taco trade. Okay, what else have we got in this week in geopolitics side? Right, so remember what I said. There's the two other ways that you can make up for the profit that's leaving here. And so we got the narrative that is needed to make up for that profit. So this week we had Peter Hegseth. He says that Beijing's credibility, they are credibly, preparing to use force to alter the balance of power in the region. So he's basically saying China's about to invade Taiwan. That is allowing for the narrative that's needed to put in the big bill or accept to American people why you should be sending loads of money because the whole world's about to end and China's about to invade Taiwan, which messes up the chips, creates trillions of dollars. They're not going to do that. They're absolutely not going to do that. It would create a global recession, risk World War III. It would destroy everything and all the advantage and everything that's in China's self-interest right now. Also, US started to accuse China of withholding key goods for the tariff war. So if during this tariff war, China withholds goods, then that's acceptable to the American people, why you'd want to send billions over and make up for the profits for the military-industrial complex. We had Hegseth say that we need to basically, you know, the whole narratives that we had there in terms of realigning the balance of power, traumatizing the American people into thinking that this is about to happen. And so that's all happening on the Asia-Pacific profits for the military-industrial complex. And then the other one is the $1 trillion of profits you can make up for by not allowing peace to happen between Russia and Ukraine. And so in order to ratchet up that narrative, what did we get this week? Well, Russia and Ukraine, they began peace talk negotiations in Istanbul, Turkey. And Russia said that there won't be any ceasefire. That was the conditions. They're only interested in lasting solutions to peace, which means CIA, MI6, NATO, retreat, demonstrate how you're not going to do that. That requires the full vassalization of Ukraine. Zelensky was the implant working for BlackRock and the Proof of Weapons Network and the military-industrial complex to destroy Ukraine, kill their own people, constrict them, and you end up with the full vassalization between whatever deal is being negotiated between BRICS and BlackRock as a US proxy of the military-industrial complex and Europe as NATO, which is all of the different narratives that are being done. And so what needs to happen if there is going to be peace talks? They cannot lead to a result right now. There's another $1 trillion to print. And so right up during the peace talks and leading to the peace talks, there was new drone attacks on Russia, within Russia. These were very prominent attacks. This was using technology as well. You know, I believe that whatever happens, Ukraine is going to be complete vassalization by Russia and BRICS and whatever favorable terms the proof of weapons network gets, because it collateralized all through the financial industrial side, all of the land. But I wouldn't be surprised if Ukraine at this stage almost gets entirely absorbed into Russia and the BlackRock future and whatever is happening at this stage, and there'll be nothing left for that. Because there's another $1 trillion they can make, and Europe is pushing up the narrative. Trump did the humiliation ritual that we covered, where Zelensky was trying to push the narrative that America is not interested in war. Trump gets to move towards his Nobel Peace Prize, but the negotiations happen with Europe taking on the budgets. And so the attacks on Ukraine, on Russia, they basically say, it's no different to basically what's happening with Israel right now on Gaza. These are both military-industrial complex proxies to strengthen the negotiations. Trump is the proxy saying that he wants to create peace, but the proof of weapons network is the beneficiary in tandem with BRICS, because they're doing the deals that are being negotiated within the Middle East as well. So we had these renewed attacks. This is essentially a sign that there is strong Ukrainian resistance as well against the proof of weapons network. So maybe this is Ukraine trying to preserve some of its land against the Russia faction of BRICS and the BlackRock faction of the US proxy and NATO. And so maybe this happened without them, or maybe this happened with them. That's the speculation. I'm not sure whether US knew about it. There was lots of narrative around US knowing about it. And maybe this is Ukraine actually trying to get some more of its own land back and using some of the weapons that it got from Europe, so that you can have a little mix of European rare earth deals with US rare earth deals, with Ukraine solving some of its sovereignty, a puppet government that will probably serve either Russia or BlackRock interest. But could be some resistance back against that as well. Russia said they will retaliate. We've seen what Russia does. When it retaliates, it brings out some next level weapon. They've already done that in the past. It doesn't bring out nukes. You don't need to worry about nukes. This isn't a suicide mission. This is just about everyone trying to get their negotiation powers and maximizing profits as well. I personally believe that Trump didn't expect this one, but maybe I could be ignorant there. But I don't think Trump expected this one. I think he would, it wasn't meant to give more power to the Ukraine side, or it could be a proxy of the military-industrial complex. But I'm starting to think that this wasn't part of the plan. I don't think Putin expected this one as well. It did make Russia look weak. It gave a new narrative. It gave it a ratcheting up a narrative. There were follow-up operations where it took out a bridge, took out infrastructure, could have led to some civilian targets as well as just military targets. But I don't believe there's going to be any meaningful peace progress because there's too much money to be made. And I think that's all part of the negotiations on the global landscape and the multipolar world order. Until the military, has basically squeezed out another $1 trillion, I think that they're maximizing there at the expense of the European people. And until BlackRock gets approximately 60% vassalization, or Russia gets more and more and more, that is the only time when we're going to find out. So this could be years from now. We could get more and more years. I'm not sure if it's going to happen during the Trump administration. Maybe it will happen towards the end of the term. But I think there will only be peace, when more money has been taken out of it. So what did we get? What's the narrative? UK, EU, US, they aren't after peace right now. They're after fake GDP. So America needs more fake GDP to sell more bonds, to back it by stable coins, to buy more Bitcoin, as we manage this, what I covered in the macro section as well. The Europeans, they need a bit of, strategic recession weakness. So more of that money will go out to the US military industrial complex, but maybe you have these more of it, some of it going to Germany. But the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, was ratcheting up the narrative to scare the shit out of the British people, to justify why everything is so bad in the UK, and yet they got billions of dollars to send over to Ukraine. Same within Germany. Everything is so bad within Germany, but they got billions of dollars to send over to US contractors in Ukraine as well, or via Ukraine is a more appropriate way of saying it. And so UK actually started to say, we are moving the country into war fighting readiness. We believe that Russia is on the verge of invading UK, and we need to be war ready. We need to be ready to, I mean, come on, the UK army fighting. This is like the IDF, trying to fight back against Hezbollah on the ground. There's no war readiness involved here. It's only going to be weapons sold for military profits. It's only going to be fake GDP, as we covered in the macro section. But Ukraine went and met with striking a bridge in Russia, in Crimea, and some of the underwater explosives that were happening. We had announcements from China that they've created artificial intelligence technology that can detect underwater submarines, which changes the game as well. And then we had, then this was used in order to really ratchet up the narrative that the UK is about to be invaded by Russia. Right. I wanted to cover one more part. Last week, and I released a video on manufacturing civil unrest. I just wanted to give some updates on what's happening in the manufacturing civil unrest campaigns within the West. So you've got peace within the Middle East. You've got a strategic retreat around BRICS. You've got more violence within Europe. You've got the threat of violence within the Asia-Pacific region, but no war there. And you've got the destabilization campaign within the US, EU, and UK. So please do watch that I published on my YouTube channel around manufacturing the civil unrest and manufacturing the destabilization campaigns. I want to make sure you understand that, but we ratcheted up some of the hate crimes, all of the narratives that are needed for divide and conquer. Within America, we had basically an incident that led to accusations of anti-Semitism, accusations of extreme terrorism that was happening within America. You had all of the influencers pushing out the narrative, leading to more deportations, leading to removal of constitution, leading to making people that say the word free Palestine, making it sound like they're terrorists, all of the gaslighting that's needed to drive all of the things that I talked about in that video. Please watch that video if you hadn't watched it. And so this is, let me make sure I get the name right. There were basically 14 bomb cocktails that were found near, basically a scene where somebody saying free Palestine was throwing them at a pro-Israeli protest within America. So they were throwing these basically, bombs, these petrol bombs, whatever they were. And they were saying that this is all about anti-Semitism. They were saying that he was shouting free Palestine, and they were saying that this is a terrorist attack. Look, to me, I don't know the exact information. I don't know whether I can prove it at this stage, but I do know a false flag when I see it, and this was very suspicious. Those that published out, there was some publish around the vehicle that this quote-unquote terrorist came from, and within the car and the vehicle, there was some USAID paperwork. And the USAID paperwork was discovered in the vehicle. This is the connection to basically strongly suggest that this is CIA or Mossad operation. Maybe they're doing this just to keep the paperwork there and manufacture violence. I'm not sure of the exact strategies, but these are all clearly intelligence network strategies to manufacture civil unrest. It means that it is funded by the deep state and these USAID NGO networks. And these are the same groups that were funding the ISIS, that were doing stealing the aid campaigns as they were profiting from making the aid campaigns. This is regional instability being used within Europe, within America, within UK, the same tactics that they would have historically used through the National Endowment of Democracy and USAID in the Middle East and Asia and Latin America. The same tactics are being used against their own people, further implying that this is a stateless entity in charge, and this is no longer governments working in the interest of its own people. And so I think this is evidence that what I said holds true. This is part of calculated strategy, destabilization. I think this is deliberate. I don't think these are natural. The end result is that you get civil unrest. And when you get civil unrest, you can basically deepen any of the surveillance state that is needed. And so what is a big part of the big, beautiful bill that I covered in the macro section? Palantir surveillance. So Palantir has created all the AI, all of the occupation as a service, all of the genocide as a service, all of the manufactured civil unrest AI algorithms. And this is, I believe, a manufactured way of making sure that you're okay with the big, beautiful bill. And more violence leads to that. Whether these operations fail or succeed, you know what the intent is. Law changes, they only follow fear. And fear, just like Patriot Act, requires violent campaigns so that people can manufacture consent for that. And that's what the video was all about. So I just want to make sure you recognize these patterns. All of these patterns were happening this week in the geopolitical side. They're still using these in order to justify the Gaza genocide. They now want to be able to use, if someone says free Palestine, that it is not just a slogan, that it is actually a demand, it is terrorism. And so if you stand for free Palestine, which to me is standing for life, liberty, freedom, and property rights, the same things that you call Western values, the same thing that you would expect for your own home. If someone tried to steal your home and tried to take your family as possessions and lead to them controlling 90% of your home and use violence, you would hope that the law would protect you. You would hope that your life is protected. You would hope that you would have the liberty to be able to defend yourself and use your Second Amendment and use your freedom of speech and First Amendment. And you would hope that your property would be protected. It wouldn't just be able to be taken over. And yet you claim to stand for those things. And many people just don't expect that to happen for the Palestinians when the British Empire comes and invades, when US funded, and Israeli funded proxies and military funded settlements are funded. And that's why I think this is coming over to you. Don't think that this technology and everything that Palantir stands for is not going to be used for you. The surveillance state and the command and control systems that were beta tested in Gaza, why don't you think they can be used for you? If you believe that this is okay, and if you accept the narratives, and if you believe and you're willing to stand against that, Palantir was originally backed by the CIA VC firm as well. And so why wouldn't it be used against you? The CIA has done operations against you all the time, And so this is why I believe that this is a humanity fight. This is us fighting for life, liberty, and freedom, property rights. And if you don't apply it to Gaza, what makes you think that they won't use it on you? And if that happened to you, don't you think you deserve the right to resist? And don't you think international law allows for people to resist against occupation as well? These things exist. And what do they do in order to prevent you from resisting against your occupier, resisting against somebody trying to take away life, liberty, freedom, and property rights? What do? They call you a terrorist. Because then when they classify you as a terrorist, by changing laws, no due process exists. They can make you end up in Guantanamo Bay with no right to a lawyer. They can deport you to El Salvador, where you won't be able to see your family again, and you will be classified as, an M13 terrorist as well. They will use the very same techniques against you, and they will use it in order to change the law so that a big, beautiful bill can come in, so that Palantir can have the technology that it needs, so that when this civil unrest happens, they can guarantee that you will consent to it, just like you did last time when they used 9/11 to radicalize you into accepting the Patriot Act and making profits for the forever wars for the sake of the military industrial complex, so you can be a useful idiot for them. I watched this happen in UK. I've watched this happen in EU, and I'm watching this happen in America right now. You may think the Palestinian struggle is not your fight, but it is. It is a fight for the very same things, because the very same techniques are being used against you right now. And do you stand for peaceful resistance? Will you join the fight for life, liberty, freedom? Will you allow for Palestinian dignity and the things you expect for yourself to also be applied to them? I think that your grandchildren will be watching these videos. There is a Gazan Holocaust that is happening right now. It is sponsored by our systems. And I think our grandchildren will be watching. What did you do during that time? And I think that it will be remembered, because this was documented. They can't rewrite history on this one. This is the modern day Holocaust. This is happening right now. It is death and destruction. I believe it comes to an end, but were you silent and complicit during this whole thing? And that's a question you have to ask yourself. We've only got each other. That's all we got. Our governments don't work for us. Follow the money, you'll know that is the case. So are you going to stay in silence? Are you going to stand for life, liberty, freedom, and property rights? Are you only going to care about it when it happens to you? I personally believe it's a test spiritually, and I believe we're in a spiritual war as well. And so whatever floats your boat to motivate you to understand what is happening right now, I will continue to cover. I will continue to follow the money. I will continue to give you everything that I've got to recognize this, but you need to decide what you're doing. We are ushering in a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting and exciting times in financial history. If you don't usher in the change that is needed, you don't adjust to this, unfortunately, you're going to be on the wrong side of history, and you're going to be remembered as somebody that allowed this Holocaust to exist and allowed the law changes to happen because you allowed them to call you a terrorist for resisting against life, liberty, freedom, and property rights. The same techniques are being used on you because you allowed it to happen to them. Alternatively, we could pull together. We could recognize that the resistance is needed. We could do it peacefully. We could own Bitcoin. We could boycott the Federal Reserve System. We could own it in self-custody, boycott BlackRock. We could have more consciousness with our money by spending local and supporting our communities rather than propping up the machine so that the profits are affected. And there is a bonus. Over time, if you save in Bitcoin, historically, you have beaten all asset classes. You have become more economically powerful. And when you are economically powerful, you get to influence the lobby because the government listens to your money. It doesn't listen to what your vote is worthless, but your money and lobby money is implemented. That's how we afford change. That's how we affect change. And that's how we do it long term. And that's how we do it with peace, love, and unity, rather than having to go down this violent path that they want to take us down. So that's going to do it for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 84. Epstein, Trump, Elon, what's real? I covered that in This Week in Bitcoin, This Week in Macro, and This Week in Geopolitics. And so please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you've enjoyed this. Hit the bell symbol, hit like, hit participate in the poll that's happening right now. Are you on Team Elon or are you on Team Trump right now? Doesn't mean you're there for life. We don't do cults here. We just do reality based upon the situation that we are faced with right now. In case YouTube, we get over to 100,000 subscribers, they will review my channel. Please help me get there. And in case something bad happens, please follow me on Rumble, where I'll carry on. And you can go to the backup on simondixon.com, join the free Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal, where you can get a free login and all the resources you need to transition to this world of AI, Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. Peace.